The first ever Aerial Firefighting Pacific Northwest Conference and Exhibition will take place April 3rd through 4th in Seattle, Washington. Hilary Franz, Commissioner of Public Lands for the state of Washington, played an instrumental role in bringing the conference to Seattle to gather fire safety stakeholders from around the country to discuss how greater collaboration and resource sharing can address the challenges presented by longer, more intense wildfire seasons. On this episode of Solutions That Save, Perimeter Solutions Vice Chairman Edward Goldberg will talk with Commissioner Franz about the Aerial Firefighting Conference. But first, they discuss how the Washington Department of Natural Resources has evolved during her tenure to become a more effective firefighting force that has put greater focus on prevention. All that on this episode of Solutions That Save, a fire safety podcast from Perimeter Solutions, helping save property, natural resources, critical infrastructure, and lives.
Thank you, James. Commissioner Franz, welcome. Thank you for joining us today on the Solutions That Save podcast, and thank you for the continued support that you provide those involved in fire management. I'm anxious to talk to you about the upcoming wildfire conference, but to start off, will you talk about how wildfire season has evolved in the state of Washington since you became Commissioner of Public Lands in 2017?
Absolutely. So it is so great to be joining you and having this conversation. I'm very, very excited about the upcoming conference as well. Yeah, so I would say wildfire season has evolved significantly in Washington State since I became commissioner in 2017. 2017 was a significant moment in the context that we had just come through the 2014 through 2016 catastrophic wildfires where 1 million acres burned in 2015 alone. We had an entire town burned quite significantly, and we tragically lost 3 firefighters. It was, I would say, a wake-up call for Washington State of what was coming, things that we had been seeing in other states, especially like California, that we always thought was not ever going to be coming to the wet and rainy state of Washington. It certainly also became a wake-up call in the sense that a bad wildfire season was no longer an anomaly. It was actually going to be more our typical, and that a good year with very few fires was the anomaly. So I'd say first, there's sort of 3 things. One is awareness. There was clearly a growing awareness amongst the public following those 2014 through 2016 wildfires that wildfires were going to be on the landscape, and they were only going to get more significant in size, scale, and geography if we didn't do something about it. In addition to that, there was a growing awareness amongst leaders. Specifically our legislators. We have an eastern-western divide, and our landscape is very different in Washington State. And mostly our fires were really sort of largely in the eastern Washington area. With each year, from 2017 to the present, we've seen an increasing number of wildfires now in the west part of our state. The second thing is we have focused on changing how we fight fires. Specifically, we've set a goal to keep 90% of our fires below 10 acres. And we're not going to achieve that goal through hope and prayers. It really comes to changing the way we fight fires. And it starts with initial attack, leveraging our air resources. The moment there is smoke in the air, getting them on top of those fires and putting them out quickly, rather than waiting a few hours to assess the situation and then send the aircraft. Another key part is pre-positioning. We used to really truly spend 4 to 6 hours in travel time from our air resources to our trucks and dozers and everything. We now pre-position our equipment in those areas where we know we're most likely to see fires based on weather conditions, patterns, based on fuel load on the landscape. And I think the other key piece is that we have really, really worked on improving the coordination and communication between local, state, and federal firefighters. As we know, no one state agency can do it by themselves, no local fire district can do it by themselves, and the federal U.S. Forest Service can't do it by themselves. So we began training local, state, and federal firefighters together before the fire even started to help on the communication, the collaboration, and the coordination. And that has truly helped us really take this all lands, all hands approach to the point that we've achieved our goal, even in the worst drought and the worst wildfire seasons. We've achieved our goal of actually 94% of our fires below 10 acres. I think the last piece is really changing the amount and type of resources available to fight fires. Washington State, when I came into office in 2017 in this position, the legislature and governor gave us $0 in our wildfire suppression budget every year, which is just shocking, right? And largely we would then spend the money in reaction to fires and then pay for it on the back end. Well, as you know, the more you can prepare up front and have those resources available before the fires even start, the more effective you are actually reducing costs, reducing damage. And so we have really worked to increase the number of resources, air resources, firefighters, equipment, at the local and the state level, because our local fire districts are so critical to getting on those fires quickly because they know the community, they know the landscape, and they're right there when the fire starts. And another key part, I would say, and I think this is proven to be sort of one of our key things that has changed in just the last 3 years, which is we are no longer putting our destiny in the hands of the federal government or other states to have those resources for us when we need them, which I think was historically that mutual aid approach or the reliance on federal government might have worked when there weren't so many states with so many significant catastrophic fires at the same time. So I'd say those are our biggest ways that our firefighting has changed, and they are all significant and they all are essential.
Yeah, so speaking about resources, your wildfire forest health funding bill was approved in 2021, committing $125 million every 2 years to boost wildfire response, accelerate forest restoration, and build community resilience. Can you talk about what impact that's had on wildland firefighting in Washington?
Well, much of those resources are just coming. We just got our first year of resources. It hasn't yet played out as at the level we know it will 8 years from now. But what I truly think is great about the context of that legislation is that it really sets the foundation of how we are going to change our state's trajectory on these catastrophic wildfires. And it does it by focusing on 3 foundational elements. It says, first, we have to have these wildfire resources at the local and the state level before the fire even starts, so we can be pre-positioned and we can be ready to go the moment there is fire, so we can get them on quickly and put them out and contain them. And we're not just resourcing one agency, but a whole army of local fire districts with the resources that largely haven't. They're volunteer fire districts. They have one engine that are outdated and old. Second piece is forest restoration. We cannot fight this crisis on wildfires by just being in a reactive response mode. We have to be proactive and get at the root cause of the issue, which is we have a forest health crisis in Washington State. Largely, it's been focused, the issue has been in the central and eastern part of our state, but we are now seeing it rapidly accelerating to the west side. And so we've set a significant goal, and now with this funding, have the resources to rapidly accelerate the pace and scale of forest health restoration to be able to actually enable our forests to start to fight these fires by themselves. As we know, fire is natural on our landscape. What's not natural is how much fuel we have on our landscape that is causing, what might have historically been a 100-acre fire, a 1,000-acre fire, to quickly in a few hours become a 100,000-acre fire. And then the third key piece of this legislation and this funding is community resilience. Too often our communities feel they're hopeless. Fires right at their doorstep, and there's nothing they can do to have prevented those fires or to prepare their homes and their communities, their neighborhoods, and their families to be able to survive those fires. But the reality is our communities can take steps like right now, when it's not even yet fire season, to one, prevent the fire in the first place, since 80% of our fires are started by people, and two, to create that defensible space around their home that gives their home a fighting chance so that it can actually be saved in those fires, which will not only help save lives and property, but it will also save our firefighters. So finally having the legislature make a commitment, a massive significant commitment of $500 million to wildfire response, forest restoration, and community resilience lets us know we're going to have the dedicated resources to change the trajectory we're on in getting on those fires quickly, to restoring the landscape in the first place, to reduce these catastrophic fires, and 3, to give our communities the tools to be able to protect themselves and their neighborhoods from these fires, destroying lives or destroying property.
Yeah, thanks. That's great. And, Washington has become a model state when it comes to battling wildfires. Will you discuss how the Washington Department of Natural Resources has evolved from a legacy organization to a modern integrated wildland fire prevention and protection force?
Yeah, and so this is what is so it was surprising when I got to the agency how outdated our approach was. Now, it wasn't outdated in the way necessarily how we worked with local and state and federal governments in fighting fires when we had fires on landscape. It's more about our own approach. We had leveraged what's called the militia model inside our agency, and our agency is roughly 1,600 people, and they have many responsibilities, everything from aquatic leases and farm leases and timber sales to recreation trail building to geology and managing volcanoes and earthquakes and tsunamis. I mean, it's a large organization we basically are 6 agents, one with enormous amount of responsibility in every corner of the state. And wildfire is just one of them. But we only had 40 full-time firefighters to manage wildfire in the entire state of Washington, which is not small. And it's because what we would do is because fire season was so small and we had very few fires, anytime fires broke out, they'd first rely on those 40 full-time firefighters, and then they would turn to other people. They turn to the IT manager, they turn to the aquatic lease manager, they turn to the forester, and they'd say, hey, want to come out on fire for 2 weeks? Come on, get out of that desk job and come help us, right? So that works when you only have a few fires and your season is really limited. But when all of a sudden you're fighting fires literally day after day, week after week, from March until November, it no longer works because people have still those responsibilities that is their basic job description. So we've had to change that approach of just relying on a militia model to now moving to having more full-time firefighters that are building the expertise and experience, not only at the initial firefighting, but going up to all the levels we need for incident management teams, and expertise, and building what I would say a truly that succession team, so that when we have retirement of firefighters or incident command leaders, we have the next one being able to step in. We still have a long ways to go, but that is the massive change about we are truly being able to position ourselves, have the resources, the expertise, and the people to fight these fires in a 9-month year.
So let's focus for a second on aerial firefighting. What's your perspective on the role of aerial firefighting, and what are your thoughts on how it's being utilized in Washington and around the country?
So this is one of my favorite topics because people have now sort of called me the queen of initial attack, which, by the way, I have no problem with that title. I like it, right? And especially when you're in politics, it really pays off to have that kind of a title. But the reason I got that title is because I am a big believer in aerial firefighting. I think it is absolutely one of our top most essential tools to being able to reduce these catastrophic fires. And I was frankly surprised how limited the use of was within our own state, as well as possibly other states and with the federal agencies. Because to me, while I have no background in firefighting, though I'm quickly becoming very well trained in it, anytime there's a fire in your kitchen or your house, what's the first thing you do? You don't say, let's watch it for a while. Maybe we should keep on watching it for a while. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we should call 911 at this point. A few hours have gone by. I'm like, I've lost my living room. I've lost my kitchen, right? We usually are like, oh my God, there's a fire. We got to do everything we can to put it out. Plus get in the experts to put it out with us, right? I mean, it's common sense. And when I look at aerial firefighting, it is because it is such an essential tool. We need to be using it, I would say, on every fire. And I'll give you sort of 3 reasons why. One, as we are seeing around 1,850 fires plus every year on our landscape. And sometimes we will literally have, like Labor Day Firestorm 2020, which was just a crisis that faced Oregon, Washington, California all at once in literally a 72-hour period. We had 56 fires in the first 24 hours. We had a hot, dry landscape. And if we had not had aerial resources coming in to help us on that, we would have then easily had not just what we saw around 12 significant catastrophic fires, we would have easily 24 significant catastrophic fires in the first 72 hours, which we didn't have enough manpower on the ground or in the air to manage, nor did Oregon and California, right? So when we have a really hot, dry landscape with a lot of fuel load, having those air resources comes in, help quickly contain them before they spread, allows us to keep fires small and reduce the number, size, and scale of catastrophic fires. And that is huge. The second thing is it reduces the size of these fires and obviously the damage that we will have on the landscape, enabling us to focus those limited resources on the significant fires. And the third is it helps us fight these large fires safely. So firefighters on the ground can get in, lay containment lines, and control fire. And I want to give listeners a really great example of this. After those Labor Day firestorms of 2020, where we literally, had within 72 hours, 660,000 acres burn, it was horribly destructive. We had an entire town burned down in just 2 hours. We lost the life of a small child as their family tried to outrun that fire. The damage and destruction I witnessed was just jaw-dropping. And I also know that we weren't alone in that damage and destruction, as Oregon and California at the very same time were facing this. We were making calls for air resources because we had, roughly, our 8 Vietnam War helicopters that I inherited. We also had, about, I'd say, 7 sort of fire bosses and a few other seats that were on exclusive contract, but everything else was call when needed. And we were making the calls from the first few hours. There were no resources to be had. As we made those calls for these resources, we were told, we're sorry, you don't have enough values at risk. Oregon and California, the majority of their fires were in very high population centers where ours didn't have the same population numbers, and we kept losing out. It was the next year that I said, we will never, ever in Washington State, ever experience that again. We are going to take our destiny into our own hands, and we're going to make sure that we have the air resources we know we will need when we have such dry periods and such fuel load on our landscape. And that's when we moved to literally, by the next year, 35 air resources on exclusive contract or in our ownership. And it made an unbelievable difference because the moment there was literally, a fire, we were on it quickly, but also with larger fires, 100,000 plus acre fires, we could have 8 or 10 fighting that fire. And anytime there was a spot fire anywhere else, we'd quickly pull one off of that fire, go put that spot fire up, get back to the major fire. And we did that all the time. And that enabled us in one of the worst droughts, not only in Washington State's history, but in Western United States history, to keep 94% of our fires below 10 acres, protect so many homes and lose very few structures, and absolutely save so many lives.
I think when people listen to this podcast, you might also get crowned the queen of aerial firefighting. That's really great. In order to make all of this more effective, people are looking to technology, and new solutions are helping fire management agencies detect and predict wildfires, including drones and fire mapping, et cetera. What's your experience been with these types of tools, and what are your plans to utilize them going forward?
So this is a place where I am so excited. And actually, this is where we're definitely seeing the benefits of House Bill 1168, that significant, $500 million investment in wildfire response. Because we have largely not had the technology. We would use our own aircraft to go out and try to do spotting of fires. But let's be frank, it was time consuming, inefficient, and not as effective because we couldn't be all places at all times. So now we are making, finally, for the first time, some significant investments in technology. We're moving past the Vietnam War helicopters that we used to fight fires, not only in better technology within our air resources, but also better technology in being able to identify fires. We just recently, you might have heard, announced a partnership with Pano AI, where we're pairing high definition cameras with artificial intelligence that will identify smoke and fire immediately as it appears on the landscape. And using multiple cameras to pinpoint the latitude and longitude of a fire will now significantly increase our ability to get resources on that fire and also alert nearby communities of danger in that area. And that is huge. I will be honest, it surprised me again when I came into this role in 2017, where many of our people, our public citizens, were finding out by fire through Facebook. That was their mechanism. Oh, I saw smoke and here's where it is. And you and I both know social media is great for a number of things, but not necessarily identifying where a fire is, getting that message out as fast as possible. My hope is, as we all have seen sort of technology in the context of Amber Alert and other, which is able to move to our phones, it's able to really get information fast to every single person. We see it also with tsunami warnings and other things, that we would have that same technology where we can quickly assess where that fire is, where the location is. We can send that message out to our local fire district and our own fire response teams, but we can also get it out to sheriffs and the average citizen who is wondering if they need to evacuate, at what time point they may need to evacuate, what is the circumstances. And when drone technology also, this is a new area. We're going to be installing 21 cameras. We're hoping to accelerate and expand that with more funding coming later. But I see the opportunity around sort of this drone technology where, while we've identified where the fire is, we can use those drones to go out and really quickly assess in real time, 24/7, sort of the perimeter of those fires, the containment lines. Have they moved past the containment lines? Are the containment lines holding? It just gives us the efficiency for us to do our job better, to help keep communities safe and help keep our firefighters safe.
Yeah, I think the tools coming along are tremendously exciting and could make all of these efforts much more efficient and effective in the future. You know, turning to perimeter solutions, we've partnered with the fire management agencies for 60 years now. So, I'd like to ask you what you'd like to see from perimeter solutions as you look into the future.
Well, first, let me just say we are so grateful, Perimeter Solutions. I mean, we need your partnership. We need the work that you do. It's integral part of interagency wildfire fighting effort. And a lot of people may not understand the importance of it, but in a lot of places, it's very difficult for us to have water sources, or those water sources are limited. We need to have the work that your company is doing, producing retardants, foams, etc. So we have multiple tools, as I say, in the toolbox to be even more effective. And so we would look to continue to work with you in the context of, continuously improving and developing products that enhance the effectiveness of aerial firefighting, support of ground resources, and will continue to provide for the safety of our firefighters, the public, and the environment. And I think there's enormous opportunity for education and awareness building about the importance and the value that Perimeter Solutions provides and how essential it is and how it works.
Yeah, thanks for that. And, we're really proud of what we've done, but really looking forward to the opportunities in the future to continue to build those partnerships. You touched a little bit on this, but the U.S. Forest Service, is always going to be an important partner in wildfire prevention and protection. But in your view, how can states collaborate and share resources among themselves so they aren't completely dependent on federal support?
Yeah, I mean, this is as you heard by my earlier response, the question is, I'm a big believer that states have to truly look to themselves to make sure that they are investing in the critical resources they need for wildfire response and landscape restoration and community resilience. That historically, while we have relied significantly on the federal government for those tools, that it is no longer the case, because we are seeing so many catastrophic fires across the United States, and all at the same time. It's no longer the case that we can rely on the federal government alone. So I see this as a place where each state needs to assess what their wildfire situation is, what it is today, and what it's likely going to be 10, 20, 50 years from now. It needs to assess what are the things to reduce those catastrophic fires, what is the level of air resources it needs, firefighting resources, right? All of that. And then what I would say is it needs to then identify strong partner states, ideally, likely very sort of in a geographic area that can become a close ally with them to say, look, we're going to invest in all these elements of air resources. We're going to get those contracts. We're going to line them up. But we also know it may still not be enough. So how do we also have sharing of resources? Not all of them, but sharing of some of them more costly. For example, we've started conversations with Oregon since they are, a natural ally to us, just next door to us, about potentially sharing in some of the more costly, expensive air resources that one state on their own may not need, right? But could share in that cost given that the fires may not be happening at the same time. A year may be bad for Oregon, but not as bad for Washington. And I see that as an opportunity for us, especially in the Pacific Northwest, as much of our Pacific Northwest states are seeing very much similar thing around increasing catastrophic fires. I also think that we need to be doing a better job of understanding and developing what we see the need is going to be 10 years, 20 years at all state level and the federal level. So when we go and we're reaching out and we're working with our partners in fire response, including your own company as well as our air resource companies, is so that they can understand how many are they going to need to be building over the next 10 years, over the next 20 years. What is that need going to be at the national level? That we also know there is a need at an international level, so that we're not all fighting for the same resource and there isn't enough available, especially when we look at supply chain issues and obviously also workforce issues. We should be knowing what we're going to need 10, 20 years at the state and the federal level, and getting those information out to contractors and starting to make sure we're building what's needed, not just for today, but in the future.
I guess recently federal agencies are increasing their focus on forest management. And while that's critically important for the future, we do need to prevent and fight today's fires. So how is Washington addressing or balancing the state's long and short-term needs?
Yeah, so we know, I'll just say at Washington State, we are making huge progress on the forest management. We set a goal 20-year goal of restoring 1.25 million acres in central and eastern Washington of federal, state, private, and tribal lands. And when I came into this agency in 2017, we had one person to do forest management for the entire state. And we, by the end of this year, will be 6 years to that goal. We'll already have reached halfway to our goal. So our goal is we will reach our 20-year goal in 10 years. As I said, we need to double down and work at the pace and scale of wildfire on our forest management. So that is great news. And we have really sort of worked really effectively on federal lands as well as our own state and private lands to have to be successful. I think, but we know this issue isn't going to go away because it was only talking about central and eastern Washington. Western Washington is our more populated area. It's also a more dense forest area, and we are now seeing increasing fires over there. And it is going to take us a long time to really do the kind of restoration work we need on those forests, especially given they're in high population centers. So we've got to start, as I have been saying throughout this podcast, really looking at, we know what our short term needs are on the number of firefighters and even on aerial resources. But I believe we need to be looking out, like I said, 10 to 20 years from now on what those resources are going to be, and making sure that we're getting that information out to contractors, getting it out to other states and federal governments. So we are not, I would say, competing with each other for those resources, which is what has been happening. It really has been the case that when I went to secure 35 aircraft, I took 35 aircraft from the federal government. That's because there was only so much air resource out there. I shouldn't be in that place, right? We should be in a place that says, we know what state of Washington's need, we know what Oregon, California, in every given year, and we know it 10 years from now, 20 years out, and in the long term, because it takes time to build these planes. And the federal government is going to know what their role is in providing those those resources as well as states. And then we together start to develop the infrastructure needed and make sure we're getting those contracts in place and the development of those. It has an opportunity to create an enormous amount of economic opportunity for our communities, as you know, in our states and our nation, while at the same time facing one of our greatest life-threatening environmental and social economic crisis, which is wildfire.
So coming up, the first ever Aerial Firefighting Northwest Wildfire Conference is taking place in Seattle on April 3rd and 4th. You played a pivotal role in bringing this event to Washington. Why was it so important for you to have your state host this event?
Yeah, so this came out of, I was asked to speak at the conference, the Aerial Firefighting Conference in San Diego. I believe it was last year. as well as the one in Europe. And it was there that I was realizing that there's enormous amount of conversation and work going on in areas like California that have, experienced, I would say, some of the most horrific fires in the country year after year. It's only getting worse. As well as we've seen now Europe facing some really new surprises. We saw what happened in Greece and Turkey and France and Spain. And I was saying, every one of the Pacific Northwest states is coming sort of to this issue of fire later than California or some of our southern states. And we're all sort of trying to solve the issue in real time by ourselves. And what I mean by that, I know our local state and fire, sort of agencies have been working together across states. They are very coordinated, but I think it's at the leadership level, the congressional level, as well as the state wide level, that engagement and relationship and coordination and commitment hasn't yet happened in the Pacific Northwest. And I saw this as an opportunity, since we all are leaning on each other, to start more of an ability to listen and learn and then lead together. And that's Alaska, BC, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. And I'm hoping that this isn't a one-off, that this is an opportunity for us to really start to lay the foundation of what it looks like for a regional wildfire army, where we can lean more on each other, but we're also taking better care of our own states and our own communities.
Going into this event, is there anything else you're really hoping to accomplish specifically from this event?
So we designed the event a little bit differently than the previous ones that I mentioned, sort of the one in California and the one in Europe. It actually is not just focused on aerial firefighting. When you look at the agenda, it really is saying that we can't keep fighting fire. We can't think that we're going to solve the wildfire crisis that we're facing in our country and our state simply by fighting fires with more resources and capacity. We have to be looking at it from a three-pronged foundational approach, which I started this podcast off with, which is absolutely investing in wildfire response resources. And that's our people on the ground and our people in the air, our equipment on the ground and our equipment in the air, and making sure we have enough of it everywhere to be able to respond as fast as possible and put fires out quickly. Second is landscape. It's sort of that landscape forest management that we have to be proactive, and not just our state. I heard this from the governor of Montana. I've heard it from governor of Idaho, as well as former Governor Brown in Oregon, that share this context about we have to help restore the health of our landscape so they can become part of our firefighting team and start to fight fires on their own. And that is a key part of this conversation. And then the third one is community resilience. We frankly have seen far too much tragedy, far too much tragedy in lives and far too much tragedy in loss of property throughout the Western United States. And my belief is the more we're helping our communities be prepared and resilient to that, the more we will be able to be responsive and protect our people, protect our firefighters, and reduce this catastrophic damage to lives and property.
I am really looking forward to the conference in Seattle on April 3rd and 4th. Looking forward to seeing you there. And I want to thank you for joining us today, Commissioner Franz. I'm definitely looking forward to connecting with you and other industry colleagues at Aerial Firefighting Conference. So for more information on this event, visit the link in today's episode description. Thank you again, Commissioner.
And thank you so much. Appreciate it. Great conversation. Looking forward to the conference and seeing everyone there.
Yeah, thank you. And James, back to you.
Thanks, Eddie. To find out how we use our experience, responsibility, and integrity to deliver trusted solutions that help improve firefighting performance, visit our website at perimeter-solutions.com. That's perimeter-solutions.com. And be sure to join us again on our next episode of Solutions That Save, a fire safety podcast from Perimeter Solutions.